we'd go to church every Sunday. It's an important part of my life. And one of the stories that sticks out to me the most from the Bible was Jesus flipping over the money changers table at the temple, right? Saying, "You brood of vipers. You're taking a place that's supposed to be sacred, that's supposed to be for good, and you're exploiting it for your own ends." And so when I went to law school, strangely enough, I was focused on what I was most interested in is prosecuting white-collar crime. Crimes against gratitude, if you will. People who can only commit these crimes because they literally hold a position of privilege in society. They get to control other people's money. It could be because they're a financial advisor. It might be because they're a public employee who has access to your tax dollars, but they have a job. They're not desperate, right? They're employed. They're not drunk, maybe on occasion, but we're talking about embezzlement, right? Fraud. Something that's happening on a repeated basis where they are thinking very clearly every time they do it. Make sense? Crimes against gratitude. You have a position of at least some degree of comfort and or privilege in life, and yet you are choosing to do more. That's the kind of crime that I wanted to go after. Now, when I was thinking that, as I started law school, I might have been one of the dumbest people in Iowa because there was no job prosecuting white-collar crime in Iowa. It didn't exist. That changed over the next 3 years. I think a piece of it was that everybody who was in the Attorney General's office got tired of those cases. They are difficult, they are complicated. Every piece of paper is another witness in the case. So you can't just talk to the people, you also have to read all the paperwork and see if the papers line up with each other and line up with the witnesses. And so I came in fresh-faced out of law school in 2010, and I said, I want to prosecute white-collar crime. And they were all like, oh my gosh, a sucker. Thank goodness. Here, take all of our paper cases, right? And so I did. I prosecuted most of Iowa's public corruption from 2010 to 2017. And what I saw were a lot of systems that led people into temptation. Who remembers the Iowa Film Office tax credit scandal, right? I prosecuted all of those cases. This was a law that we wrote that was just literally an invitation to fraud. It wasn't just like, it was sort of tempting, it was like wide open, you know? Here's what I'm talking about. You could get tax credits for making a movie in Iowa. But not only could you get tax credits, if you had no tax liability at all, if you didn't actually owe taxes, these tax credits were transferable. You could sell them to someone that did have a tax liability in Iowa, which makes them almost as good as money. They sold for about 88 cents on the dollar. They were also refundable, and so people could get money back from the state if they didn't have that tax liability. So again, just about as good as money. They had almost no rules for how you spent the money. You could have, under the Iowa Film Office tax credit law, made a movie in Iowa, purchased a brand new Boeing 747, used it in the background for a single shot, and then resold it for, I don't know how much. I would think, 90% of what you got it for. And then you could get half of what you paid for it in tax credits. So you would make a profit on deciding to have a plane in the background with one shot. Does that make sense? You're buying it for this much, you're getting 90% of that back, but then you're also getting a 50% tax credit on the 100% to begin with. Insane. Invitation to fraud. I spent years prosecuting those cases. There were lots of civil cases that stemmed from that as well. I also prosecuted what turned out to be the largest lottery rigging scheme in American history. I'll sell my book for you tonight. If you like true crime books and you think courtroom dramas are fun, I would highly recommend The Winning Ticket, a book by me. If you think that I'm full of it, the Washington Independent Review of Books actually labeled it a favorite read of the year in 2022. I think it came out in 2022. So it's not bad. There's a chapter in there about growing up in Decorah, so if you like small towns in Iowa, you might enjoy that. And the guy who masterminded the whole thing was from a small town in Texas. So it's kind of interesting that here are these two guys from out of the way areas that ended up on the opposite side of the V in one of the weirdest criminal cases ever. But here was this system that led Eddie Tipton into temptation. He had the keys to the kingdom. He was running the IT for the Multi-State Lottery Association, and it was his job to write the computer program that picks winning numbers. Fascinating. Not only was that his job, but the people who would audit his programs to test them for randomness shared with him what their testing protocols were. Not a great idea. Oh, that's how you tested for randomness? Noted. And so Eddie used at one point a couple points his brother, at one point his best friend, at one point a woman that he had met on Plenty of Fish, to claim these lottery jackpots in Kansas, Iowa, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin, over $20 million in the face value for all these tickets. Sometimes they brought in Bigfoot hunters to help make the claim too. Yeah, Bigfoot, like Sasquatch. It's a crazy story, I'm telling you, it's worth the read. Eddie's brother was a Bigfoot hunter. He thinks that Bigfoot is real. In fact, with the Colorado ticket, he almost got busted on the very first jackpot because he made a few mistakes, and he ended up getting interviewed by the FBI while in the hospital, having broken both of his legs, falling out of a tree while Bigfoot hunting. You can't make this stuff up. And so I ran in 2018, I won, and then I got started at the State Auditor's Office. We do financial audits of the state. We also do financial audits of state institutions like Iowa State. We do financial audits of cities, counties, and school districts if they hire us. They also are able to take bids from private entities if they want. We can choose to bid, we can not. They can choose to hire us, they don't have to though. And then we still do those public corruption investigations. Now there's a position in the office for people with a law enforcement background. And we also do efficiency promotion. We started that efficiency program. It's called PI, Public Innovations and Efficiencies. And so the idea behind the program is that when an entity does a really good job of saving tax dollars, I bring them pie, and I get to eat pie a lot because of the program. Yeah, sweet. Sometimes tart. Strawberry rhubarb.
Depending on your taste.
Yeah, depending on your taste. So the program, we started it in my first year. It is actually named PIE because that spells pie. And it is actually the award, if you win it, is I do come to town with pie. But the idea is we have about a 10-page checklist of things that your school districts, your cities, your counties can do to save money. We send it out every year. We ask them to send it back to us, tell us what they're doing, and then we compare them to cities, counties, and school districts of their size, right? So we're not comparing Decorah to Des Moines, we're comparing Decorah to other towns of its size. We also collect ideas. So in addition to having this sort of high contest where we give awards for the best performers, we collect ideas for things you can do to save money. One of my favorites is from Dickinson County. They built a swamp cooler for their county courthouse. The idea here is electricity is much more expensive during the day. Your air conditioner only runs in the day, right? Because that's when it starts to get hot. So your air conditioner is using expensive daytime electricity both to create coldness and to blow that coldness into the building in the space you want to cool. A swamp cooler is just a big old hunk of ice. So they use cheap nighttime electricity to create the coldness to make ice. And then in the daytime, with the expensive electricity, all they have to do is blow the air across the ice out into the building. They're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars with this. There are landfills in the state of Iowa that collect methane instead of flaring it. Anybody ever notice the giant pipes coming out of the ground at landfills around Iowa with a fire off the end, right? Methane is created as our garbage decomposes. In Muscatine and Lynn County and Sioux City, they have some system in place to actually capture that methane, and then they can sell it because that's natural gas, right? They're making money where literally everywhere else, we're lighting it on fire. So there's all these fun things that you can do in the program to save a lot of money. It's an exciting program, and it's been a fun thing to be a part of, and I get to eat a lot of pie. We call those ideas, by the way, recipes. Thank you, I'll be here all night. And to me, I don't think that there's a Democratic or a Republican way to audit. I think there's just auditing. And so the senior leadership team that we have in the office is a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican. In fact, it includes people who made campaign contributions to my opponent in 2018. If you pay much attention to politics, you're probably thinking that's different. If you don't like politics, you're probably thinking that's great. If you are into politics, you're probably thinking that guy's an idiot. Right? Because I'm supposed to punish people that make campaign contributions, right? To my opponents. I shouldn't be giving them higher paying jobs. That's crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't want to run an office where people look at us and wonder, well, if I blow the whistle on people in my town, are they going to not believe me because I'm not in the right political party? Are they going to look at me and say, well, if I blow the whistle on this official, are they not going to believe me because that official is in the right political party? That's wrong, right? If we want to keep government from misusing our tax dollars, we have to make sure that government represents everybody, that there isn't an in-group and an out-group. As much as possible, that there isn't an in-group and an out-group. And so we have that system in place. Again, lead us not into temptation. You know what kind of conversations we do not have when we're sitting and having our Monday morning meetings with a bunch of people who belong in different political parties? When issues come up and we hear a tip that just came in, nobody asks, well, which political party is that person? Nobody asks, well, what's better for so-and-so's career because they're connected to that person. Right? Because we don't all care about that. The things that we all do care about are, well, what did we do 5 years ago when an issue like this came up? Well, what does the rule say about what they're supposed to do with that money? Well, what does the contract say? Where did the money go? We ask the questions that we're supposed to ask. Because we're not sitting there as members of a private club. We're sitting there as public servants who belong to different private clubs, but are here together for one reason: to stop government from misspending your money. And it's when you work together that way across those political divides that you can actually do better work. How do I know that? Because we uncovered a record amount of misspent money in my first term as state auditor. A record amount. We're proud of that. We worked hard to do it. We were assertive, too. Because, you know, what good is an auditor who sort of just sits in the background and goes, you don't want to show me that? Oh, okay, well, then I probably don't need to look at it anyway. That's fine. I'll just go back over here and look at my spreadsheet some more. Probably not going to find a lot of misspent money that way, right? One of the reasons that I was interested in running in 2018 is because as I worked with people in the auditor's office from the Attorney General's office, I found they had the same mindset I did. Oh, you don't want me to look at that? Now I really want to look at that. I wonder what could be there. Why are you being so worried about that? Now I'm excited to look at that. You made a tremendous mistake in telling me not to look at that. So we found a record amount of misspent money. I came in and I said, I'm going to be assertive. Why? Lead us not into temptation. 2 stories I will take to my grave to know that we did a good job and we set a good tone right away in the state auditor's office in my first term. Go right into that. Lead us not into temptation, right? We don't want to tempt people. One story was from a coworker of mine who had been at the AG's office and moved on. And they moved on and worked somewhere else in state government and had this conversation with somebody within my first year. Well, we used to make these purchases that we knew were technically illegal, but we quit making them because it seems like the new state auditor is more willing to call us out. Yes. I feel seen. You get me, you know? The other one was from a guy who is on the other side of the aisle. He's a Republican. He works in state government. He's been in elected office. He said, I've never seen more middle managers scared of the state auditor's office. I was like, perfect. Then they're not going to screw around. Once you have that attitude, that assumption that the auditor is going to look and will not hesitate to call you out, the auditor's actually going to be a lot more productive doing this same amount of work. Does everybody understand why? Because those people aren't going to screw around anyway. Then, The Iowa legislature passed and the governor signed a bill gutting our power to make people worried at all. SF 478 created 8 different categories of documents that we aren't allowed to look at. This was after our first term when we uncovered a record amount of misspent money. And then they created a 9th category, kind of a catch-all, where if any other document that someone might have some expectation of privacy in that has personal information. Well, personal information could be a name. And so maybe we get documents withheld from us that, say it's an email from John. And it says, gee, I hope the state auditor doesn't find this stuff. We'll be in big trouble. Oh, well, we better hide that stuff because John would like some privacy for that email, right? And now, we can no longer go to court if we think that if we think the documents are being unfairly withheld from us. We did that with the University of Iowa. We took the University of Iowa to court. I bet you all are just loving this part. We beat those Hawkeyes. In front of the Iowa Supreme Court with a unanimous decision, we whipped them. They tried to withhold information from us when we were looking for conflicts of interest for the biggest debt deal in Iowa history, their deal with their utility plant over there. So we used to have the capacity to go to court. Now, instead, under this law, we would have any disputes resolved by a 3-person arbitration panel. Sounds boring. Here's the easy part. The 3 people on that panel are 1 person from the state agency that we're auditing, so they already told us no. I think we know how they feel. 1 person from our office, and then a 2nd person appointed by the governor. So these 2 people answer to the governor on this 3-person panel. You do not need the degree in accounting to figure out what's going to happen, right? The American Institute of CPAs, which writes the auditing standards for the United States, for every single audit that happens, public or private, said you should not pass this law. It will lead to an increase in fraud. It will lead to potentially damaging the state's bond rating. The Institute for Internal Auditors said, don't do this, it's going to increase fraud. David Walker, who was the United States Comptroller General for George W. Bush, and in 2018 was a Republican nominee for governor in his state, said, don't do this. It's inconsistent with auditing standards, it's going to increase fraud. That is now, regardless of all their advice, the law in the state of Iowa. And we have now been denied access to records pertaining to the Board of Parole and pertaining to the state's vouchers program. This was just in the news this week. It's been a long week for me. Tuesday. $100 million program. We can see that $100 million went out, but we have not been allowed to look to see if the state has any controls in place whatsoever to make sure it's being spent appropriately. Pretty frustrating stuff. This is not, ladies and gentlemen, how we make sure that government protects your tax dollars. Because the message is very clear to everyone who handles your tax dollars in the state of Iowa. Hey, you screw something up, you don't necessarily have to tell anybody about it. And I'm not telling you that it's this governor or the next one or the next one after that. But I am telling you this scenario is going to happen at some point. Hey Governor, thanks for the meeting. I only need 5 minutes of your time. Really appreciate you taking it. I've got good news and I've got bad news. The bad news is the auditor asked for some documents and we looked at them before we handed them over. That's actually good news before the bad news, before the good news. And the good news about that is we looked at them and what we found was a lot of fraud. We've basically just been kind of letting this guy pocket all this cash for years and we really haven't done a good job of looking at it. But the good news, Governor, is we told the auditor that they couldn't have the records. And so as long as you appoint someone to the review panel that agrees with that, then no one will ever have to know. And we figured that'd be good because, I'd like to keep my job and you'd probably like to get reelected. And so probably the better thing here to do is just, let's just try to do a better job next time, but the public doesn't need to know what happened with their tax dollars, and that's better for you and me, right? And then what have we just done? We've just led someone into temptation, right?
Yeah, so after this session, Kim Reynolds is attempting to institute a DOGE program specific to the state of Iowa. What's your thoughts on that department and kind of how it potentially is redundant because your office does a similar role?
Sure, good question. we now know a little bit more about her proposal than we did when it first came out. I welcome anybody to add to the effort of reducing wasted tax dollars, right? So this is, my understanding is I think it's gonna be an all volunteer effort, which is great, because then we're not paying money to people to help figure this out. If they can put together a list of things that would help save money, like a PI program for state government, great. I welcome that. I do have a suggestion, which is repeal SF 478, because that would vastly decrease waste, fraud, and abuse in state government by making sure that no one was led into temptation. However, if you look at the Iowa Doge Task Force proposal, it has 3 missions, none of which are reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. So they're looking at different aspects of what they want to do and not that, which does not surprise me, because that's very consistent with the fact that they don't want to dig into waste, fraud, and abuse. This is incredibly frustrating, number one, because it's entirely due to SF 478, right? It used to be abundantly clear when the auditor's office asks for something, they get it. Now they have all these stunts that they can pull to say, well, we're not going to give you this, we're not going to give you that. And now when they deny us records, right? I think we all agree they can't just come right out and say, well, we don't want the auditor's office digging around because we're not sure what they'll find. We all agree that they can't come out and say that. So they have to make other noises, right? Probably in English, right? That sounds like a thing, right? And so they're making noises that sound like a thing that aren't a thing. They're saying, well, you need to have a different engagement letter for that. An engagement letter is a thing. It exists in auditing. We have one. The Iowa Supreme Court says we don't need one at all. We already have one. They're saying, oh, well, you need another one. It makes me think of the kid, like the 5-year-old who stands in the hallway and goes, you have to pay the toll before you can go past me. And you're like, that's cute. Here's a sucker, right? That's what they're doing. They're just sort of making things up. Hey, you gotta pay the toll. You need another engagement letter. Do I need a polka dot hat? Should I rub my belly and pat my head at the same time? Like, how many hoops are we gonna jump through here, right? Let's be serious. Don't act like a 5-year-old. Don't tell me there's a toll that I have to pay. We need to look at the controls, because all of the auditors in our office working on this case say so. We actually went so far as to release a statement from 2 of our senior auditors who've worked under 4 different state auditors. They came out and said, this report, this inquiry, this finding is all in the same mission of nonpartisan accountability that our office has done for decades. We have to look at this information under the ACFR. And they're just saying, no, we don't want to show it to you. That is incredibly frustrating to me. I don't know the degree to which the combination of people involved on the other side are lying versus just saying what they're being told to say, right? But some of the meetings have reminded me of a quote from Upton Sinclair. It's very difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Our professional staff has sat down repeatedly with some of the people in the administration to explain to them repeatedly why we have to do this. And they just can't seem to learn it. And the temptation in a system where you have only 2 choices is to just demonize other people. Because as long as you can convince more than half the people that the other choice is worse, you don't have to do the hard work of solving anybody's problems. I may be a thief, but my opponent is a thief and a murderer. Vote for me. Right? Will you quit stealing our money? No, but I promise I'll never kill you. Oh shoot, you got my vote, right? Anybody else feel that way? You're sick and tired of voting for people you're not super excited to vote for?
Like Russian roulette.
But you feel like you have to because you look at the other one and you're like, whoa boy, okay, I guess I'm voting for this schmuck. Nothing in the United States Constitution or the Declaration of Independence says that we should have a 2-party system. There is no reason that the Democratic and the Republican parties should have separate privileges. The Democratic and do enough to solve our problems to be able to force us to choose from one of each of them. It's absurd. Think about this for a second. We're in the United States of America, where we value freedom, where we value independence. And yet, before we get to the 4th of July to celebrate our independence, in our political primaries in June, we tell our independent voters, sorry, you don't get to participate. Why? Because it's easier to control people when you exclude the ones that say they want to be independent. How un-American is it that to exercise your constitutional right to vote in a taxpayer-funded election that you paid for, you have to join a private club first? Make that make sense to me. If Republican and Democratic parties want to exist and they want to endorse a candidate, fine. But they should not have the right to force us to choose between the lesser of two evils. There are better ways to do this. And we shouldn't have the situation where independent voters are disenfranchised. It's wrong. Every voter should have an equal right to vote. But here's what happens. People know, well, you're either going to vote for me or you're going to vote for them because you only got two realistic options. So I can be a jerk as much as I want to be. As long as I can convince you that the other person is worse, I don't really have to work that hard to solve your problems. We live in a system that incentivizes poor behavior. We live in a system that doesn't reward good behavior. Now think about this as an alternative. What I just described, what we've been living in for all of our lives here, voting 1.0, right? Now think about voting 2.0, where you actually have multiple options that have realistic chances to win in the general election. Now imagine how those people behave when they're candidates or when they're in office, right? All of a sudden, instead of saying, well, I'm going to demonize John here because John and I, we're only two choices, so I just got to think, I got to get you all thinking that he's a scum of the earth. Actually, now we're in a situation where John's got a lot of people who know him really well. They love him, they adore him, they've worked with him, they went to school with him, and so he's got his base. I've got my base. All the candidates have their base. But I want to speak nicely of John. And I would be polite to John and emphasize areas where I agree with John, because maybe some of his supporters will give me a little bit of support too. Am I talking sense to people?
Yeah.
So then, if I'm knocking doors and somebody's got John's sign out, I'm actually going to go knock their door anyway. Because if we're using ranked choice voting, I'm thinking, well, you're going to rank John number one, so you're going to rank him number two. Or if we're using approval voting, like Fargo, North Dakota, you could vote for both of us. Approval voting works like this. Here's 4 candidates. Vote for all of them that you approve of. Think about how that changes the incentives for the people who are elected. We don't have to judge the person, we can judge their actions, and we should judge their actions in a system that pushes them towards incivility, towards not solving problems, towards selfish behavior, towards corruption, right? But if wherever you live, you can, we're in Ames, okay? So we're in a place that's mostly Democratic. And this is, I'm just using the local example. Let's say you have a local representative that you don't like, that you do think is corrupt. But you're not going to go so far as to vote for someone in the minority party. Well, under a different system, you could replace them in the general election with a different candidate. And they could just run the whole way through. They don't have to run through the primary with the incumbent. We can do this. To me, this is absolutely possible. They're doing it in Alaska. They're doing it, part of it in Maine. Like I said, they're doing it in Fargo, North Dakota. They're doing it in lots of cities in Utah. There are better ways to run our elections so that we don't have to ask questions like that, so we can have elected officials who are actually more accountable and responsive to voters, because they will actually have every single person's opinion equally weighed in their favor. And they can't just rely on wearing the right color shirt or the right color jersey to get through the election. 7 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.